NIL Now, a podcast dedicated to the name, image, and likeness of today's college and high school athletes.
Name, image, and likeness is a good thing for players.
NIL Now, where the stars of tomorrow are getting noticed today.
It's time to make a statement.
Lauren Sisler.
So we're going to explore the crazy and wildly interesting world of name, image, and likeness.
And Kevin Jones.
It's the Wild Wild West, but we're wrangling it in, and we're also keeping our eyes on it with this show.
This is NIL Now, presented by Headline Studio and Reddit.
I think the guests and the stories that we talk about will bring a lot of insight to what people want to know about NIL.
I love that.
Hey there, Giants fans. Welcome to the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap Giants podcast from NJ Advanced Media, NJ.com, and the Star Ledger. Daryl Slater here with Bob Brookover. We're doing this here on Monday after the Giants' really putrid loss in so many ways to the Lions yesterday afternoon. Not only did they lose and perform poorly, worst performance of the season, dropped to 7-3, had a lot of significant injuries coming out of that game, and yesterday just could not have gone more poorly for the Giants, who saw the Cowboys win in Minnesota, and now a short week here as the Giants get ready to go to Dallas and play on Thanksgiving. Giants and Dallas both 7-3. Dallas now the 5 seed, the Giants the 6 seed. The 49ers at 5-4. They play tonight, or the 7 seed. Washington is starting to play better, 6-5 at the 8 seed. So the Giants' wiggle room is pretty much disappeared now. They have a 51% chance of making the playoffs. I mean, forget about the NFC East. It's a 2% chance, and those percentages by 538. And so that's where the Giants stand right now. Just an ugly day all around, Bob, for this Giants team, which has now dropped 2 of its past 3 games.
Yeah, I think, even bigger than the loss on Sunday, yes, you lose a game, but losing the players they lost, losing both your starting cornerbacks, and having the offensive line be in such disarray. I mean, we'd seen, or you had, I'd seen it from afar, you had seen it up close, what the bad Giants look like. What happens when Daniel Jones throws 2 interceptions and Saquon Barkley can't move? But we hadn't seen it this year, and it was nice to watch what they were doing. But now you wonder if they can get that mojo back. Especially this week, you get really 0 days almost to prepare for the Dallas Cowboys, who finally found their mojo in Minnesota, of all places, against an 8-1 Vikings team. They played by far their best game of the season. Everything just seemed to come together in the perfect storm, bad way for the Giants this weekend.
Yeah, and you mentioned the injuries, so we'll just go over them here real quick. 6 significant injuries for the Giants coming out of that game. 6 injuries, period, and they were all significant. Wan'Dale Robinson, the Giants' best remaining receiver, tears his ACL. His season is over. Obviously, he had missed some action early on with his knee injury initially that he had suffered in week 1. And so his rookie year over, the second-round pick, having played just to look it up here. How many games did he wind up playing? He only played 6 games.
He did, but I just think it's a devastating injury for this team.
Absolutely.
I mean, they had already lost a lot of rookies, and in spurts he had shown, and big spurts yesterday. He was their best player on the field yesterday. He'd shown a dynamic side to him, and as a rookie, you just want to get to see that. If you're Joe Shane and Brian Dable, you just want to see as much of that as you can. And now they're not going to get to see any more of it till next year.
And he was going to be able to help this team. We'll get back to the rundown of where things stand receiver wise and line wise, but just the rest of the injuries. Dory Jackson, the Giants' number 1 cornerback, reportedly has a sprained MCL. Suffered that, as everyone saw, on a punt return, which is why it was a foolish idea to have him return punts. Tyree Phillips, a neck injury. He's the guy who has been, in case people casually pay attention, has been playing right tackle in place of Evan Neal, who has a knee injury. Matt Parrott came in and replaced Tyree Phillips. So we don't even know if Phillips or Evan Neal will be ready for Thursday in Dallas. John Feliciano, the Giants center, very valuable player, though not a tremendous performer, but important player. Neck injury for him also. We'll see about him for Thursday. Fabian Moreau, the Giants' other cornerback, again, who had only been in that role because of Aaron Robinson's likely season-ending knee injury, and then Cordell Flott didn't perform well, the rookie, and hurt his calf. And so Fabian Moreau had a ribs injury, and he's we'll see for Thursday, but he didn't return. None of these guys returned to the game. And Jason Pinnock, the number 3 safety, with his Xavier McKinney out, and Dane Belton getting bumped up to the starting role. Pinnock, a jaw injury, wound up going to the hospital after the game. So a lot to track there in terms of the impact. And additionally, on the offensive line, in terms of all that turmoil at right tackle, as I mentioned, and at center, as I mentioned, the left guard situation is kind of in flux too, because they don't have Ben Bredesen, and they won't have Ben Bredesen again this week because he has to stay on IR for I think one more game. And so they start Shane Lemieux over Josh Azudu, and then they bench Shane Lemieux. They put Josh Azudu back in. So really 3 spots on the offensive line are in flux: left guard, center, and right tackle, for one reason or another, mostly due to injuries in those situations. And so, and rust, obviously, on Shane Lemieux's part there. And so the receiver room, just circling back to what you said, I mean, this is the Giants receiver situation right now, without Odell Beckham. We'll get to that. But they have Kenny Galladay, obviously, Isaiah Hodgins, Richie James, who's clearly more of a returner, Marcus Johnson, who, we've seen how reliable his hands are, David Sills, who was a healthy scratch yesterday, and Darius Slayton, who has continued to play well. But Wan'Dale Robinson's injury, just another blow to a receiver room that no longer has Kadarius Toney. It really doesn't have Kenny Galladay, who's been a non-factor. And then, of course, Sterling Shepard out for the year with a torn ACL. So a lot to wrap your head around there.
A lot. And I just wanted to go back a second to Adoree Jackson returning punts. Watching back on the broadcasts a little bit while looking some stuff up, including the play he got injured on. Kevin Burkhardt made an interesting comment right after that about how Brian Dable didn't necessarily want to have one of his starters returning punts, but given the Richie James situation of losing 3 fumbles, 2 in Seattle and another one earlier in the season, felt the need to do it. But, Brian Dable after the game was, injuries happen, but that was an indication to me, because these guys obviously meet with the head coaches before they do these broadcasts, that Brian Dable had at least mentioned to them, I don't really want to do this, but we're doing it anyway. So,
great point. Yeah, that's a good point from the broadcast. And so now they're dealing with fallout, like as we mentioned, on the offensive line. And well, let's just start with the secondary, because we're talking about Adoree Jackson right now. Like, what the heck are they going to do there? Presuming Adoree Jackson is going to be out maybe a month with a sprained MCL, presuming, let's just say, Fabian Moreau can't play, then what do? They put Cordell Flott in there, and then benched him, right? And they wound up with
It was weird that they benched him, though, because he forced a fumble, and then they took him out for a while, and then he had to come back. It's not good, though. It's just not good. Nick McLeod's going to, if those 2 guys can't play, it's probably going to be Nick McLeod and Cordell Flott and Rodarius Williams, getting the bulk of the time. Who will they call? Who will they call from the practice squad? I guess Zion Gilbert. He's the only other one.
He's the only other cornerback. Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't, and they can't really have Darnay Holmes play outside, and so there's no good solutions here. And of course, Rodarius Williams just came back from IR. He had torn his ACL last year during his rookie year, and so a big time unknown factor there, and just so many now unknowns in this Giants secondary. Of course, Xavier McKinney's still out, and he needs to miss at least 2 more games. Dane Belton starting for McKinney, and it's really just Julian Love now back there in the Giants secondary, sort of the last man standing. And so
Jerry Jones might send a limo bus to the airport on Wednesday to pick up the Giants. Yes, come on, boys.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys have to be certainly eager to play in Dak Prescott, seeing the secondary, and but even more so. I mean, just think about we touched on the receiver situation, and the Giants were so inept offensively. How are they going to block in this game against this Cowboys front?
They didn't do a very good job the first time. So,
Yeah,
one of the things we might see, and I'm not sure they don't want to see it anyway, is Nick Gates playing center. Um, somebody had put a clip, I don't know who it was, online on Twitter of Nick Gates on one blocking play, and he was completely destroying the guy he was blocking on the play. So that might be something the Giants want to see anyway. You know,
yeah, and of course Nick Gates was the Giants center last year before he had that horrific leg injury, so he's
right,
been their starting center.
right,
I think that in terms of his youth, he probably has, if he can return and play, he's returned, but if he can continue to stay healthy and perform well from after this horrible leg injury, and he's got a longer term future as their center potentially than John Feliciano, who's just a 1 year guy for this team. And so, they're probably looking at say Neal and Tyree Phillips can't go at right tackle. That's Matt Parrott there. A right guard obviously would be Mark Lewinsky, then Nick Gates or Feliciano at center. Then left guard, not a lot of good choices there because Bredesen has to miss one more game. You have Lemieux or Azudu, and then of course Andrew Thomas has been great at left tackle, but just so many question marks. And in terms of another guy who could probably perhaps help in blocking, Daniel Bellinger, who is not on IR with his eye injury,
right.
which required
Eligible to
surgery.
come back.
It sounds
I,
like
I just don't know if they'll do it on
yeah.
this short week. I doubt that they will.
And the other guy, Azeez Ojulari, can come back in terms of a defensive guy.
And again, but he didn't really practice last week, so
Yeah.
I talked to Aziz last week, and he seemed to think he was ready to come back, but that, as we know, that doesn't always. They always think they're ready to come back. They could have legs falling off, and I'm ready. So,
Exactly. And as I mentioned, Xavier McKinney has to miss two more games while on the NFI list. So just injury issues across the board for the Giants at receiver. We talked about just now the implications for the line and the secondary. What about, we're kind of scattering all around here, but just what about the receiver implications and what this could mean for Odell Beckham perhaps joining this team?
Our colleague Steve Politti wrote today that it's not a good idea for either the team or the receiver. I think it would be a much better idea for the team at this point because of how depleted they are at the position. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Because I think Odell is, he did it last year. I want to pick the team that's going to win the Super Bowl. And I can't imagine that if the two teams he narrowed it down to yesterday were the Cowboys and the Giants, that he looked at that and said, "Oh yeah, can't wait for my reunion in my old home." And and then he looked at the Cowboys later in the afternoon and said, "That star might look pretty good on my helmet." There's a lot of factors beyond that because somebody's got to figure out the money he wants, which by reports has been ridiculous. So there's a lot to figure out there, but I just don't see it happening with the Giants.
Yeah, I think it depends on what he wants. Does he want to return to familiarity and play with his, well, not even really play because Sterling Shepard's probably never playing for the Giants again. But he's buddies with Saquon Barkley, and does he want to go back and be around familiar faces? And then perhaps sacrifice a ring. I think, all things being equal, just consider the money. Let's just think if the money is going to be equal, then who does it come down to? Obviously, the Cowboys give him a better chance of winning this year. It'll be fascinating to see, obviously, because as we established and everyone knows, these two teams are playing on Thanksgiving, and so it's being framed as the Odell Bowl and all that. And let's be real here for a second. Like, this guy at this stage of his career is more of a name than a producer. Like,
He
that's
is, and they're not the same type of players, but it reminds me a little of Deshaun Jackson, who's still still this year tried to come back. And Deshaun's obviously older, but since he's been in his 30s, Deshaun has been trying to, come back and be the player he once was, and he keeps getting hurt. His reunion with the Eagles was a disaster. His reunion with John Harbaugh, who was one of his coaches earlier in his career this year, ended after one game. So, Odell's still a little bit younger, and based on what he did last season with the Rams, he obviously had a lot left in the tank last year. But now you add another ACL injury to that. Your point is well taken. What does he have left, even if the Giants can bring him in?
And that's probably, that's largely one of the points that Steve brought up. And, you're talking about a guy who played 7 games in 2020 and tore his ACL that season, midway through that year, tears his ACL again in February 2022, same ACL. And yeah, he did have 5 touchdowns in 8 games last year with the Rams, and wound up playing 14 total games last year, won a Super Bowl, did some good things. But, if you look at his numbers, I mean, he had 537 receiving yards last year, 319 in 2020. So he's not a 1,000-yard receiver type anymore. And 30 years old, he's not ancient. He just turned 30 earlier this month. So you'd think there's still some athleticism there if he can stay healthy and the knee can cooperate. It's, that same left knee. And so, and if you look at it relatively speaking, I mean, the Giants, they, like you said, they would love to probably have him if they can make the money work, because yes, even though they're probably not going to push for a Super Bowl this year, they need some solutions in this receiver room, like this year and beyond this year, because
they do. And that's the thing. If it was a matter of, oh no, we'd rather look at this kids, but who are the kids they want to look at?
Yeah, they're hurt. Wan'Dale Robinson's hurt.
Right. And the rest of the list is not, I think they know what they think about Richie James right now. They go down the list, and there's nobody else on that list where you say, oh, we want to see what this guy can do. They know what they're going to do with Kenny Galladay. Of all the guys that catch the ball, the one they want to see the most is Daniel Bellinger.
No doubt. And you think about the state of this receiver room and how it reflects for next season. And you mentioned Galladay's gone, and you go down the list. Isaiah Hodgins, he is kind of what he is, 1-year guy. Richie James, ditto there. Marcus Johnson, same. Wan'Dale Robinson's hurt. He'll be back next year, obviously. He'll be part of this team, unlike Galladay. David Sills, you know what he is. Darius Slayton's in a contract year. He may or may not be back. He's played well. They made it clear what they think of him by having him take a pay cut. Colin Johnson's an interesting enough guy, but I don't know. I mean, he hasn't played this year, obviously. So we'll see about him and his future with the Giants. And Sterling Shepard, like I said, he's almost certainly never playing for the Giants again after his latest injury. And then you have a bunch of practice squad guys who sort of are what they are, and they're going to have to rebuild. Joe Shane's going to have to rebuild this position next year. There's no doubt about it. And so that has to, if they're signing anyone who's signing Odell Beckham based on what he wants contract wise, it's not going to be a 1-year rental, right? So does Joe Shane look at this and say, this guy can help us in the future? Because that's what it should be about. If they're going to give him the money he wants or close to it, they got to think, okay, in his age 31 season next year, is he going to be able to be a helpful piece for this team? And that's sort of what they have to factor in, because there are going to be opportunities in this receiver room, clearly, for the Giants next year for newcomers.
Yeah. And to me, I couldn't do it without seeing it, and you're not going to see it unless you sign them. It's not like a college day, a pro day for college kids where you get to see them work out or you get to watch them play a season in college. You're going to kind of be doing it blindly. So, I mean, I haven't really looked too closely at the free agent market coming out for receivers. But I don't know. I would have a hard time doing it if I was them.
No doubt. And I think that sort of sums up the Odell stuff and the receiver stuff. And then look, the receiver situation is not their only problem offensively. I know there's obviously going to be a lot of focus on Odell Beckham and this week, and he's going to visit the Giants and the Cowboys after Thanksgiving, and it sounds like he'll have potentially a new team by the middle of next week, perhaps. But the issues run deep for this Giants offense, and based on what we saw Sunday, I mean, Daniel Jones 2 interceptions, Isaiah Hodgins lost a fumble, season high 3 turnovers or giveaways for the Giants. They had 8 all year coming in, which is the third fewest in the NFL. They had done a great job of not giving the ball away, no more than 2 in any one game. And now, not only did they give the ball away, they started slowly again. They had 6 points until about 13 minutes left in the entire game. They got to go to Dallas this week with a beat up offense, and specifically offensive line, and play the number 12 defense in the league, according to PFF. And then in terms of the pass rush, the Cowboys are first. So, I mean, that could be a recipe for absolute disaster for these Giants. And 26 in run defense for the Cowboys. So maybe a little bit of glimmer of hope there for Saquon Barkley, coming off really one of the worst games of his career. He's been remarkable this year, but just 15 carries for 22 yards and a long of 4 against a Lions team that had not defended the run particularly well. Lions now 24th in PFF's run defense. So how significant do you see this hurdle being for not only this Giants offense, but for Saquon Barkley, who is now going to have to shoulder even more of the load? How significant is a hurdle for this group and him to get back on track?
Well, and very significant, and I don't think it's it's some I don't know how much of it was Saquon yesterday. I think probably more of it was the offensive line, and Andrew Thomas said 2 interesting things after the game yesterday. One was we didn't do a very good job of getting to the second level which opens up lanes for Saquon. And we didn't do, he said, and it's very difficult when an offensive line doesn't have continuity. So those 2 things happening, it's trouble, and he averaged 1.8 yards per carry yesterday, I think. In his career, when he averages under 3, the Giants are 112. So
yeah, that's a great stat. Wow. And he averaged 1.5 yesterday. So they almost never win when he goes under 3. Yeah.
Yeah. 1-12. And then when Jones throws 2 interceptions, which is, I'm sure, true of every team just about, but he's 1-7. And when he throws even 1 pick, they're 5-16 in his career. So,
yeah. Wow.
There's some teams that, like a Patrick Mahomes could throw an interception or 2 and win. The Giants offense isn't there. I mean, the amazing stat to me is this team's gone 35 straight games without scoring 30 points. I think the second closest is the Steelers at 17, and twice as many as the next team streak of not scoring 30 points. And Jones has been the starting quarterback for 30 of those games. So, it's a testament to how dynamic this offense is not.
That's a remarkable stat, and it's hard to imagine them eclipsing 30 in Dallas this week, given the state of everything on their offense, from the line to the receiver group. And Barkley had 931 rushing yards, most in the NFL coming into the game, and he goes 22 on 15 carries. So if you think of how, his worst games, really the only one worse than that in terms of when he had at least 10 carries was that 2019 game against the Jets. He had 1 yard on 13 carries, which I remember that's almost impossible to do. Really the second worst game of his career in terms of a game in which he had at least 10 carries, a bunch of carries.
Did you cover that game?
What's that?
The one on 13, you covered that game?
The November 10th, 2019 game with one. I think it was Jets Giants. I probably was there. Yeah. I don't remember. I didn't remember it until I saw this.
Imagine Saquon being that, having that kind of game. He's so good. It's just hard for me to imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the year he was really limited by high ankle sprain. He actually, he sprained his ankle in the massive comeback win down at Tampa with Daniel Jones's first start, and they came back from down 18, and also in that game, Barkley suffered a high ankle sprain that wound up bothering him for the rest of that year. So while he had pretty good numbers in 19, that was sort of the start of his bad injury luck, which of course only got worse in 2020 with the ACL and serious knee injury. And so Yeah, I mean, he's obviously emerged from that this year and become a dynamic player. But you see Sunday against the Lions, as we saw, he needs help. He needs an offensive line that gets to that second level, as Andrew Thomas said. And so, that's something that they're going to have to do a much better job of this week because everybody knows they're going to lean on Saquon Barkley.
Oh yes, they're gonna have to. I mean, it had been their formula for winning all season. Daniel Jones threw for 300 yards for the first time this season, but it certainly wasn't because of the game plan. It was because of desperation to try to get back into the game. So, you know, he Jones had the two interceptions were bad, and both came at bad times too. The first one, he obviously got fooled by Aiden Hutchinson dropping into coverage, which he it was a remarkable play by Hutchinson because he dropped quick and pretty fast, just backpedaling. He's pretty good. I see why they took him second. And the other one, bad timing too, because the Giants and it was kind of a reflection of the day. They had, I think, 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 6, and Saquon only could pick up a yard, so that left them with a 4th and 5. They go for it, and Jones they'd gotten into Detroit territory before that, so they had moved the ball, and then he just overthrew. I think it was Richie James. So and the ball got picked. So they were two bad ones, and he really hadn't thrown a bad interception since opening day. And when he tried to go to the end zone, because the other one was against Dallas, the final offensive play. They were in desperate straits at that point. This was really his first bad interceptions since opening day. So it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back against a team that really pressured him last time, and he played under that pressure. He played a great game that night against the Cowboys.
Yeah, and that being, of course, one of the Giants' 3 losses at 7-3. They lose in Seattle too. I mean, clearly the home loss yesterday to the Lions is the worst game and the worst loss, obviously, the Giants have had this year. And just as we step back and look at the bigger picture here, you kind of alluded to it. The gauntlet that's ahead for this Giants team here now, the wiggle room gone, 2 losses in 3 games. They're now 7-3, still in the hunt for the playoffs. It's not like it's all over. Obviously we know these injuries are going to have lasting impact beyond Sunday and probably beyond Thursday in Dallas. And so clearly, obviously a huge game for the playoff race on Thursday in Dallas. The Cowboys, obviously would have the tiebreaker over the Giants if they sweep them in the season series and win on Thursday. And so, but the Giants aren't going to look ahead, but we will. And after at Dallas, the Giants play the Commanders at home. They play the Eagles at home. They go to Washington. They go to Minnesota on Christmas Eve. So really between now and Christmas Eve, we're about to find out a whole lot more about the Giants who, after that it's home against the Colts on New Year's Day and then at the Eagles to finish the season. And we'll see if they keep playing like they did on Sunday, by the time the calendar turns to 2023, they're not going to be in it or they're going to need a whole lot of help. Because this gauntlet coming up, 4 straight NFC East games followed by at Vikings is a significant uptick in the difficulty of this schedule.
I almost think that they have to win after this game against the Cowboys, which I can't see them winning. They have to win one of those next 2 home games against either the Commanders or Eagles to get in. If they lose both of those, that would put them in on a 4-game losing streak. Assuming they lose to the Cowboys, and then they have to go to Washington and play at Minnesota. I mean, at a time when they got a 4-game losing streak, it could be spiraling out of control. So I really think they need to win one of their next 2 home games to really keep things from spiraling out of control.
For sure. I mean, let's just assume, and I think we're both, and we'll get to the pick, but we're both going to pick against the Giants in this game, and so that puts the Giants at 7-4 with 6 games remaining. And so, really, I mean, the magic number probably 10. If you get to 10 wins, you're probably going to get in. That means they need to at 7-4 close at least 3-3. And so, they could probably beat the Colts at home. And like you said, maybe the Commanders at home being their next quote unquote easiest game there. Then, like you said, they got to steal one. They have to steal one, whether that's at Commanders or versus Eagles. They have to steal one of those games. Maybe at Eagles in the finale, and then like we said, at the Vikings is a tough one. So if you're going to give them, if you take them at 7-4 going into December, and they got to finish 3-3, and you're going to quote unquote give them the win versus Commanders and versus Colts, then they got to steal one. And which one are they going to steal there? Versus
I mean,
Eagles.
the one thing they could have going for them, although I don't think they will, because I didn't think the Cowboys would lose to the Packers, but it's possible the Eagles won't have anything to play for on that final Sunday. But and maybe after 2020, the Giants deserve that. Would be an interesting thing 2 years later if they went into Philadelphia with the game not meaning anything after what happened in 2020 with Washington and the Eagles.
Yeah, and as you look at this game as it stands right now, Giants Cowboys, I think the initial line for this game is somewhere around 10 maybe, or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong there, but
I saw 8 this morning, I think.
8, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of underscores, and the news just came out here. We saw it yesterday from Jordan Schultz of The Score, and Ian Rappaport from NFL Network just tweeted about Adoree Jackson, which again, this why the line is 8 or 7 or 10 or whatever it is the reason it's high is largely because of these injuries that the Giants sustained, and the biggest one, probably, I think this is bigger than the Wan'Dale Robinson injury. Oh, it's right there. Whatever. We don't need to rank them. But Adoree Jackson officially out 4 to 6 weeks with a sprained MCL. That news coming just now. And so as you look at that rehab time, let's count it off. I mean, 4 weeks from yesterday would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see. He missed this week, 2, 3, 4. That puts him back on December the 18th or 17th or 18th. That would be the game that still has to be flexed or not flexed to whatever day it's going to be. That's the Commanders game. So Adoree Jackson is at least out the next 3 games. And if you throw 2 on top of that, that could put him out through the Vikings game.
Right.
Horrible injury for the Giants.
Yes. And the other thing that's that all this is bringing to light is how awful the Xavier McKinney injury is looking too. Especially Jason Pinnock, showed some stuff in the third roll, but now he's out, and now you're down to Dean Belton and Julian Love as your healthy safeties. So I mean that injury is really coming back to haunt them too.
Very much so. And the theme to this Giants season in so many ways, even going in, and it's kind of been lost because of the wins, obviously, is thin or small margin for error. And that is on so many levels, right? If you look at the roster for this team, they could not afford to get injured, obviously, have major injuries. And that margin for error on the injury front has been crushed throughout the year, and that's really perhaps now starting to catch up with them. And also a small margin for error in terms of how they play and how many mistakes his team can endure. Like you said, I mean, a Patrick Mahomes team can perhaps endure 2 interceptions from their quarterback or 3 turnover day from their offense. That's not the case for this Giants group. They need to play very clean, turnover-free ball, and we've seen that's been a recipe for how they've been able to win this year. A small margin for error for this team on multiple fronts, and they just obliterated that margin for error on Sunday with how they played. And then the injury, you could call it injury luck, but Adoree Jackson being back, you're hurting your luck or your chances by putting your number 1 cornerback there on punt return, and that came back to bite Brian Daboll in a big way. And that right there, that injury could be looked back on if the Giants miss the playoffs as one of the big factors in it.
Absolutely. And here's the thing about that too. It just doesn't seem, I don't know, I could be wrong. I don't, this is just based on pure observation without looking at any stats. although, the Jets game was decided on a punt return yesterday, but it doesn't seem to me like there's many games decided on punt returns, or that many punt returns even happen anymore. And they happen so infrequently that why risk a starter? When I covered the Eagles, the Eagles would do it. I mean, and the Giants fans know this as well as anybody, but they would do it only when absolutely necessary would they put Deshaun Jackson back to return a punt. It's like, okay, we're desperate. Let's put Deshaun back there to see what happens. Or same with Brian Westbrook, who, they both had big returns at the Meadowlands to beat the Giants. But Andy Reid would only do it when, it was desperation time. And, I understand that Richie James had kind of lost the job by dropping 3 punts that led to turnovers, but there's got to be somebody else there that can, besides Adoree Jackson, that can just handle the punts. That's all. Don't give them short fields.
Don't give the ball away. Yeah,
right. Don't give the other team the ball. That's what you want your punt returner to do.
Seriously, I mean, even if you put Darnay Holmes back there, who's a quasi starter as a slot cornerback, is he not capable of catching the punts? Like, what is the risk? It's about risk reward. When you have a small margin for error, it's basic common sense. Small margin for error. How do you balance risk reward factor? And is having a guy so maybe Adoree Jackson can field a punt and return it 10 yards instead of just fair catching a punt or returning it 3 yards. I mean, are those 3 or 10 yards that much of a or 7-yard swing, or however you slice it, that much of a difference maker when you talk about possibly getting your number one corner hurt? And now I understand that the sprained MCL can happen on any play, and and the Giants know they've happened on plenty of plays to plenty of significant players this year. The torn ACL and the sprained MCL have been the 2 injuries of the year for this team.
Injuries, whatever the French word is for year.
Yeah, exactly. Du jour, or whatever. Yeah, do whatever. Jour being day, I guess, right? So to brush up on my French, but I just why? Like, is it really worth it? And the other thing being, you can really get concussed on a punt return. You saw Richie James got concussed, and you're taking direct blows when you're on punt return. And the other factor is, one of the other reporters actually mentioned this when we were walking down after the game yesterday. What evidence have we seen that Adoree Jackson is a difference-making punt returner besides obviously?
I was just thinking the same exact thing.
He struggled in the NFL with the Titans, and they benched him. I mean, yes, He was great in college, and so that's what you're banking on.
Right. I mean, that's my point about Deshaun Jackson and Brian Westbrook. The Eagles knew Brian Westbrook from Villanova. He did it all the time in Villanova, was incredible at it. And they knew Deshaun Jackson was incredible at it. I mean, what was the evidence that Adoree Jackson was this great punt returner is a great point.
Year 6 for him in the NFL, and he has not really done much of anything on punt return in the NFL, which is fine because he's turned into a pretty good corner for the Giants. But you saw it in college at USC, but it's been a long time since that was the case. And again, I'm not saying special teams don't matter. They do, as the Jets saw yesterday. They matter. But they matter, I think, in terms of minimizing screw-ups. The likelihood that you're going to, like you just brought up, like difference-making play on punt return or kickoff return. Like it's just not as common anymore. It's, it's minimizing disasters on your coverage unit and also on return. Just don't screw it up. And to Adoree Jackson's credit, he didn't. He was pretty fine. He was fine back there, but
he was. But you find somebody else who doesn't screw it up. And if you think Adoree is your best chance to win a game that you're down by 2 with 25 seconds left,
bingo.
Then put him back there. Then
that's a good point. Yeah. So
do it then, but don't do it on every. The weird thing was they didn't even do it on every down last week. On every punt last week, they obviously said, well, we don't want to do this all the time, but you're going to pick the plays where, okay, he might not get hurt on this one. Let's put Richie back here on this one.
They did a good point. That it was three Now, these weren't all returns. We're just talking about whether the guy was back there, whether he fair caught it, returned it, or let it was downed. Dory Jackson was back for 3 punt returns against the Texans, and Richie James is back for 2. So you saw Brian Dable hedging even then, but he tempted it and he got bit, and yeah. So we'll see. We'll get right to the picks now, and we'll wrap this up. I'll go, and I just typed it up, and you did too. So I'll give you mine here. Cowboys 30, Giants 17. Too much working against the Giants. They're not going to be able to move the ball in this game.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'm gonna say that the Giants come back and have a better performance than they did last week, than they did yesterday, but it still won't translate to a victory. Cowboys 24-13.
Yeah, certainly 13 points offensively. It's going to be about as bad as it was in this past game, but it sounds like you're saying they're going to be able to hold up maybe a little bit more on the defensive side there.
Yeah, I think they'll just play a better game. I think the one thing you have to say about this Giants team is they are a resilient bunch that they believe in themselves, but there's just so many things going against them right now. They scored 18 points yesterday, but a lot of that was garbage time points. So I mean that was my point about Daniel Jones threw for 300 yards for the first time this season, but so what? If you throw for 300 yards when you're ahead and you're putting up big yards in the first half and putting points on the board in the first half, but that's not what happened. And I don't see it happen against the Cowboys either. It's gonna be a rough day for the offense, I think.
And good, we'll wrap up on that, and just one quick just point off what you said there. Put out a better product is an interesting one, because if this team was like 5-5 or 4-6, and they were doing what everyone expected, which was going through the process of rebuilding year, then the whole notion of look, they play better against the Cowboys, and they're showing growth, and it would matter a whole lot more than it will if things go the way you project there, because while they could perhaps build on a better performance against the Cowboys, this season has like suddenly, in the eyes of the locker room for sure, and even in the eyes of the fans who you heard groaning and booing yesterday, it's become about results. I mean, how the team was 7-2 going into that game, and fans were upset that they were playing basically how everyone expected them to play. The expectations have changed, and it's about trying to get into the playoffs now. Now, if they miss the playoffs and they collapse, and given all these injuries, is it the end of the world? No, it's not. I mean, they've shown some good signs here, but I wouldn't say unfortunately for them, because it's a good problem to have. This notion of like show growth and put a good performance out there is gone. I mean, Brian Dable, to his credit, has changed things where it's about winning, and like we said, though, probably too much stacked against the Giants in this one. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening. Be sure to like, review, and rate us on all your favorite podcasting platforms. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the game, whether you're going to be there or going to be hanging out at home and watching, and we will talk to you next week.